Before we dive into today's topic, I just want to give you a little reminder about this Reimagining Prevention series that's been going on for the past several weeks. So the vision that's been shared throughout this series is to create an integrated statewide system to reach families sooner. It's to build strong local prevention networks to strengthen not only families, but communities and prevent child maltreatment and early entry into child and family serving systems. And how do we do that? By building capacity of community partners, by joining with others around a common goal of child and family well-being, and by starting to look at the larger landscape of services being offered across private and public agencies. So the goal of this series, really, this collection of webinars and events, it's really to bring all the players of prevention work at different levels of prevention work to the table to learn about key foundational principles of prevention and to start reimagining the way that we're committing to, coordinating with, and investing in prevention work. Another goal of the series is for a diverse audience to come together to learn prevention principles such as utilizing an equity lens and engaging with community when developing, planning, and implementing prevention work. The thoughtfully curated topics of this series provide information and ways for agencies to move upstream towards primary prevention to support and strengthen families. The ultimate goal here is for all of us to work together to break down silos and to develop a comprehensive continuum of prevention services that includes primary, secondary, and tertiary strategies and interventions grounded in fairness and centered in equity. So now for the first time, federal legislation has provided state agencies the opportunity to leverage Title IV-E funds to shift to an upstream approach to serve children and families and to start thinking differently about when and how we engage with families and the quality of services we're delivering. So what does that look like, let's say at the state level? The state is currently planning for the implementation of the Family First Prevention Services Act Part 1, which is a federal legislation that states can choose to opt into to deliver evidence-based services to individuals that are at imminent risk of entering into foster care. And these services will be provided to families that are involved with child welfare and probation, but will keep the families intact and the children at home. So California wanted to build upon this opportunity of the legislation and moved even further upstream, which is what brings us all here together and as part of this ongoing series. So let me point out who the partners are, who's involved here. You might recognize some of these names. If you've been attending the series, you've seen them quite a bit. We have the California Department of Social Services, CDSS, which serves, aids, protects needy and vulnerable children and adults. We have the California Department of Healthcare Services, DHCS, providing access to affordable, integrated, high-quality healthcare. Strategies TA, which provides technical assistance focused on building statewide long-term solutions. And of course, we have CalTrin, whom I'm representing today, which provide free professional development and extended learning opportunities to professionals, primarily for staff of family resource centers, CAPCs, and other child and family serving organizations. Together, we have carefully, thoughtfully curated webinars and events working as a team to bring these to you. So we're so excited that you're here. So now that we've learned a little bit about us, I just want to know who's with me on the webinar. I have two polls for you to help us figure that out. The first poll is going to ask you, where are you visiting from? When I say visiting, I mean joining. So as you can see on your screen, we've got this colorful map of our great state, and I'm curious, which region are you joining us from? Thank you. I can see you answering that. I see, oh, looks like we have a nice representation across the state here. I'll show you here in a moment. Let me end this poll and share it so you can see. That's very exciting when we have counties that are participating from all throughout the state. And just excited to have you with us. Now I want to know what you're doing within that region. So I am going to ask you one more question. And that question is, what's your role? So I have another little poll. And if you see something that doesn't quite fit, there's a few options there. Feel free to type it right into the chat. Oh, okay, great. I see a couple coming through. Thank you so much. If I'll give you a moment to answer, I'll take a little coffee break. Great. I see a couple say other. Wonderful. Tell us in the chat. Michigan, welcome. Great. Let me end this poll and I'm going to share these results. So as you can see, we have some representation. We have different experience in the room, which is great. The hope is that you are able to take strategies that you're learning today and take them back to your state or to your counties and to your teams. So with that, I'm going to keep on moving. So as we begin, I wanted to answer a question that you may have, maybe you don't. Why a change management series? How is a change management series in the middle of this comprehensive planning and implementation conversation? How is the change management series helpful? What can you gain from it? Well, I'll start by saying that the information and the strategies discussed in this three-part series, and I'll mention it again, are ultimately to support you and your county's efforts in the comprehensive prevention planning process. So I'm curious, speaking of the comprehensive prevention planning process, can you think of any changes, since this is about change, what changes might your organization, your county experience through this process? Anything come to mind? What kind of changes might be on your horizon as part of this comprehensive prevention planning initiative? What do you think? You could type that right into the chat. New partners and resources? Yes, Julie, absolutely. What else? That is a big one. New roles and responsibilities? Absolutely. You know, you're going to meet maybe new partners, strengthen cross collaboration. I love it. New ideas I see in the chat. Maybe new tools that you're going to be asked to use, new types of assessments, new conversations, new reframing, right? Reimagining. Thank you. And you're correct. So we know, therefore, that change is going to be a part of this process. So really, the information that you're given today is intended for teams and agencies that are going to be coming together to do some good work as part of this county comprehensive prevention planning team. And you can't leave change management out of that and the process of change. I see new lens and perspective. Absolutely. Communication with less barriers. Love it. Great. All right. So speaking of this comprehensive prevention planning, during this session, I'm going to refer to it quite a bit. You'll hear it once or twice at least, and I'll even talk about some of the tools that are listed here. Now, if you're looking at this and you're like, this is a great graphic, what is it? There was an entire webinar dedicated to the roadmap for comprehensive prevention planning, and it was great. It happened a few weeks ago. It'll be on the landing page where you can find all of the reimagining prevention. I'd highly recommend you watch it. If you look at this graphic and you think, I'd love to know what that means, please start there. This roadmap, thank you. You can see that right in the chat. This roadmap and a copy of that is in the chat now. Sorry, I've lost my place. As collaborative partners, when we think about how to use this, we're going to work together to create local plans, right? So the greatest hope here is that the strategies that you learned today and throughout this change management series, this three-part series, which today is part 2, will help collaborative teams as you do that important work together. I want to remind you of one more thing if you haven't seen it. But before I show you, actually, I'll show you, then I'm going to ask you. When I say the ALC, the ACL, the all-county letter that laid out the comprehensive prevention plan and it gave some further details, will you just tell me in the chat, have you seen it? Have you read it? No judgment, just curious. Have you read the ACL 22-23 by chance? Yes, great. No, great. Awesome. I see a couple yeses and a couple no's. All the right answer. This is a great place to start. So here is some good news. We've got a link for you that we're going to drop right into the chat. I'm going to ask you to save that link because we're going to talk about it and you're going to want to read this in its entirety. When I say collaborative partners and people coming to the table and comprehensive prevention planning and all this, I'm taking an excerpt from the ACL 22-23, this all-county letter, which addresses the need for cross-sector partnership in the development of the comprehensive prevention plan. It's It's how it's going to be put together. So I highlighted on this page for you something that's very specific to that verbiage. And I want you to see that because it might be you. You might be represented in that yellow highlight. Child welfare, probation, behavioral health, tribes, Office of Education, community-based services, FRCs, CAPCs, those with lived experiences. As you can see here, the cross-sector collaboration is an important piece and requirement. And so I want to make sure that as we are moving through this process together, that you see yourself and you see where you fit in. Today's conversation is about bringing all of these wonderful partners to the table in pursuit of completing your prevention plan. So, and I've said it a couple times, but this is a 3-part series, and I want to lay out that yellow circle in the middle. That's where we're at today. This 3-part series, today's part 2, leading through change. The first part was exploring a prevention mindset. It was pre-work for this session. So if you didn't see that, I highly recommend that you watch it after this. And of course, we have one more coming up called Cultivating Commitment, which is about what is the path moving forward? And that'll be happening in just a few weeks. I'd encourage you to attend all 3 topics. I know we have provided the link a few times about the landing page, which has all of the different webinar replays and resources. You can find them all easily there. We've made that very easy for you. Okay, so now we're going to move into our topic today, and we're going to start with an activity. Now, if we were all in a room together, I would see who is and who isn't participating. So this is all I can say. Even though I can't see you, we're not in a room physically together, I'd highly recommend you follow along because this isn't a visual, it's an experiential exercise. So you have to try it to understand it. All right, so hope we all play along here. I'm going to ask you to do a little activity, and it's going to start with you, hands on your lap or hands on your chair. I'll do it too. Now, I'm going to ask you on the count of 3 to cross your arms across your chest. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, cross your arms across your chest. Come on, no one's watching. No one knows what you're doing. Okay, now uncross them. Okay, on the count of 3, I'm going to ask you to do it again, right? 1, 2, 3. All right, now hold them there. Now, chances are that you've crossed them the same way each time. So notice now which arm is over which arm. Is your right arm over your left arm? Is your left arm over your right arm? Okay, which one? All right, my right is on top. So let's uncross, and on the count of 3, you're going to put the opposite arm on top of the other. So you'll be crossing them the other way. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Kind of weird, right? Uncross them. We'll do it one more time that other way, right? So not the way you did it the first 2 times. We're repeating the way you just last did it. 1, 2, 3. All right. So I'm going to ask you, this is a very simple exercise, but as you were doing it, how did it feel to cross your arms the second time? So the first time you put your natural arm as you wanted to, and then I asked you to switch it up and go the other way. How was that? Was it easy? Was it a little bit difficult? Did it take you a second to figure out, okay, wait, my left arm goes over? Why do you put that in the chat? Was that an easy thing to do? Was it kind of difficult? Took you a second? It does, right? Had to think about that one. Yeah, absolutely. Some people said unfamiliar, had to focus, awkward, uncomfortable. It feels unnatural, doesn't it? Like, wait a minute, my arms don't even go this way. Well, guess what? I'm glad that you participated because this activity is how I describe the process of change and what change feels like. So if you look back at all of the different ways that you've described that, uncomfortable, felt kind of weird, I can tell you, yeah, sometimes change does. But we know that change takes time. And if we would have practiced this, I can now easily switch back and forth because I've done it so many times. It's now a natural activity I can participate in. But if you haven't, it takes a moment. And so is change. So what I want to talk today about is really this process of change, knowing that it can feel a little awkward at times, but also as a leader, if there's leaders in the house, how are you leading through change? If you are not in direct report, if you don't have direct reports, people are not reporting to you, you're not a leader in this room, that's also great because I want you to understand the process that you may experience in the change cycle. Specifically, we're going to talk about 3 important things. We're going to talk about the JCurve, which I asked how many of you have heard of the JCurve, and I'm excited that it was not an overwhelming yes. We're going to talk about team development. We're going to talk about next steps and tools. I can tell you that this is my personal wheelhouse, change management leadership. I love this discussion, so I'm excited for any questions that come my way. So we kind of talked about change a little bit, but let's put it for those in the room that maybe didn't feel comfortable to do the exercise. I'm going to ask you instead to give me a word. When we think about the process of change, let's put it into the context of this comprehensive prevention plan. All different partners to the table, thinking up, like we've used words like reimagining, reframing, moving upstream. When you think about that change, what word comes to mind for you? There's 2 ways you can answer that question. You can either click a link that's going to be dropped into the chat, or you can scan that QR code with your phone and type it in there. So let's think about that process. What word comes to mind as we think about the change that is needed and will happen as you implement the comprehensive prevention plan? You can click that link to respond, or you can scan the QR code, and I'm going to show you what's happening as you do that. Okay? Give you a moment. Now let me show you something kind of fun. What you're looking at here is a collection of your words. Scary, awkward, worried, yeah, hopeful, great. Now, the more times that a certain word is used, the more prevalent it is on the screen. We can see which one that is. We have growth, challenge, new, exciting, collaboration, uncomfortable. Yeah, change can be. Absolutely. So I'm grateful that you're sharing these because I want to remind you of something, a couple things, and I'm going to say it more than once. Thank you. Yeah. These are all real, valid emotions. Thank you. So this is kind of a fun, it's a fun little app that we use, and thank you for participating. So here's what I want to remind you, because this is important to know. The process of change, each of you responded in a way that feels very true to you, because change is a very personal experience and everybody experiences it differently. That little arm exchange activity, some people, it's actually not a big deal. They're like, oh, that felt more normal than I thought. Yeah, for some, change is. And for some, the process of change is very challenging. So as a leader in the room, it's important for you to know that all those words that you've used to describe can very easily be the words that the teams and the other agencies you're working with may be using to describe that process as well. That's good to know. That's a great starting point. It's important to know as well that change, feeling uncomfortable, is natural. It's actually part of the process, which we're going to talk about in the JCurve, which is next. So thank you for following along on that. But I will tell you what, I actually have a quick question for you. Knowing that these words are how not just you feel, but others are feeling around you, how does that help? How does that help you in this process? What do you think? Put it in the chat. How does knowing where we're starting and the feelings and the thoughts, you could type it into the chat, please. How does that help you? How can you use that in your process? Any thoughts? I'll take a coffee break while you ponder that and type it in the chat. Yes, makes me feel that I am not alone. It feels less isolating. There's hope. Awareness helps me to be prepared. Absolutely. I really appreciate those thoughts, because that's the point. That's the point in understanding that the change process is intended to be sometimes a little challenging, a little scary, but you're in it together, right? So there's several different people coming to the table, more comfortable knowing that others are feeling the same way. Yep. The more I learn, the better I serve and support. Absolutely. Really grateful for your responses. Okay, let's talk about that JCurve. So the JCurve, I asked you, have you heard of it? Are you familiar with it? And some said yes, some said no. So I'm just going to ask very quickly. So I know how much to lean into it. How familiar are you with the JCurve? Are you very familiar? Like you could lead this presentation today. Are you somewhat familiar? Like you've heard of the definitions? Maybe you can match them up. Maybe you've heard about it, but you have no idea what it was about, or this is the first time you've ever heard of it. Great. I see a couple responses coming through on that. Let me show you what you said. Oh, okay. Then you're in the right webinar, because if you are somewhat familiar, not very familiar, great. Then you're in the right place. And I'm actually honored to be the one to talk to you about this. So the JCurve, what is it? The JCurve, yeah, you are right at home. The JCurve theory represents the stages, the process that an individual or an organization, a group, a team may experience during times of change. It's called the JCurve because of the unique shape of the model, which actually forms a letter J. So let's look at the origins before we talk about, what it looks like exactly. Where did it come from? Well, it's actually inspired by the 5 stages of grief that Kubler-Ross identified back in the 60s, which illustrated the non-linear path of human emotion and grief. The model was adopted into many different industries and began to grow in popularity and interest when it was applied to change management, because change management is not linear. Just like grief isn't step 1, you feel this for this long, and then you feel this next thing for this long. Not at all. It is twisty-turny and sometimes changes as well. And that is okay. We know that. We can plan for it. So as I mentioned, it illustrates the path that an individual, a team, or an organization will likely take in the face of a new process or change. Good for you to know as you are forming and developing these comprehensive prevention planning teams of yours. So here's the fun thing. When I say a JCurve, I'm going to tell you what a JCurve is not first. That yellow line that splits the middle of this page, we're going to consider this the current state. This is where we're at. This is status quo, if you will. Below that status quo is adverse impact. That's the discomfort. That's uncomfortable. That's confusion. That's doubt. That's all the things that we might feel that are a little less comfortable than they are today. Above that yellow line are the tangible benefits. They are the things that have actively improved, gotten better, changed as a result. So when I say JCurve, this is what people think I mean. They think it's like this, like, boop, you dip your toe into adverse impact. Maybe it's hard for a week or two and on we go. And the JCurve takes a small detour, the scenic route, if you will, through the adverse impact on performance, but the majority of the time is spent in tangible benefits, and boom, you hit your desired state right up on top. That is not the JCurve. That is not what the JCurve looks like. Let me show you what it actually looks like. This is the JCurve. That yellow line that we're looking at, that deep well, this is what is expected in times of change. This is what we can say is more typical. That when we encounter a change, there's a drop-off point. And as we're getting used to something new and trying it a different way and reimagining and reframing and learning, that it feels that there's disruption, and that can feel uncomfortable, and everybody experiences it differently. But we know that as you are implementing strategies in each phase of the JCurve, there is hope, and there is a way out of that deep well, and you start moving up towards tangible benefits, ultimately to your desired state. So I want to explore, when I say milestones and strategies, I want to explore what I mean by that and break it down into 5 different, think of them as stages, that are often used to describe this JCurve model. The first stage is the actual area of change. This is when something is altered, implemented, changed, reframed, reevaluated. That is really the point where the trajectory starts to shift. What we find ourselves next is in the second stage, which can feel like doubt. Doubt, this isn't working. This is taking longer. This is more work. This is going to feel different, be different. You're asking people at this point to start crossing their arms the other way. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This feels odd. All those words that you used, those are the words people are using to describe change. And everyone is moving maybe at a different pace, right? The next stage is acceptance. That's when we start to realize, okay, fine. So the more I practice this left over right, right over left, I guess it's getting a little easier. All right, sure, I see what you're doing here. I think about this stage, and we're actually going to cover it in more detail in your planning process. This is when we start to find some rhythm together, some stride together. It's not feeling as awkward because we've made it through the awkward phase. The next stage is experimentation. And this is a very special stage in the change process because you have moved from highlighting the adversity of change, and now you're starting to see how and why it's beneficial. Once you start to see how and why it's beneficial, there tends to be a little bit more experimentation. People are like, okay, well, we made it through that. What if we change this small thing? What if we streamline that? Not only are people finding a rhythm, but they're actually starting to be innovative and create new things with this new process. And of course, that last stage is considered integration. That's where it is now standard practice. Good news, bad news, my friends. Most people think that that desired state of integration also means that we're done here. I'm so happy the change is done and I'll never have to see change again. Not the case. Most times in an organization, in an agency, or maybe throughout this process, your J-curve may repeat. So think of it, it kind of looks like a repeating J, almost like a garland on the way up. That with every new and different change, there might be a different new well, and that's okay. That's part of the process. So some important notes I want to highlight for you as I say this. I don't know, were there any rowers in the house? Did anybody ever do rowing in high school or for fun, college? I didn't, but I really appreciate the example I'm about to give because it makes so much sense when I think about change and I think about what you're doing, the hard work that you're doing together. I see it like a rowing team. On a rowing team, each person is experiencing the process a little bit different, right? Everybody has to pick up that oar and everybody has to use it in order for the team to move forward. So we have a boat with a mission critical role. They all have a shared common vision. They all know what they're doing, but they each have their own responsibility in doing it. And they have to work together to get it done. I can't tell you how many times I've thought about this graphic as I've learned and explored and heard about the comprehensive prevention planning team and the work that you're going to be doing together. So as we talk through these strategies, it's to make this team that you're seeing on the screen effective, efficient, in sync, knowing that, you know, the more that they practice together, this team of however many, 9, 10 people, didn't get into the boat and were able to stroke together at the same time automatically. It took practice, it took work, but it took commitment to the change. And that's what I'm going to ask you for today as we think about it. All the words that you use to describe change are valid, but let's think about what it could look like if we were all in sync together. Okay, so we've talked about the J-curve. I want to focus now on another theory because they pair so well together, and then I have some activities to talk to you about. So the J-curve pairs very, very well with something called the Tuckmans Theory of Group Development. In the chat, have you heard of this? Tuckmans Theory of Group Development. You might know it best as forming, norming, storming. Does that sound familiar? I'll ask you to put in the chat. How familiar is that? You've heard of it, not heard of it? Is it new? Somewhat? All right. This is a natural overlap. It's new to you. Amy, you're going to love it. This is a natural overlap. There is a natural overlap between Tuckman's theory of group development and the J-curve. They pair very well, and they also present great strategy in combination for newly formed teams, groups, or to strengthen an existing group. So in a little more detail, The theory is based on observations of group behavior and dynamic in different settings. It describes the different phases that groups need to go through to grow and to thrive as a team. Similar to the J-curve, there is an expectation of challenge. That's expected. That's good. That's good that we know that because there's a plan for it. Similar to the J-curve, the stages represent necessary and inevitable stages, which include facing challenges, tackling problems, finding solutions, planning, work to ultimately deliver and into the intended result. So the group we'll be using today as an example, of course, in this case, is your comprehensive prevention planning team, your county. This is your team. We're going to focus on the first 4 phases, which are forming, storming, norming, performing, because it, like I said, that cycle may repeat itself. So we're going to kind of focus on that first. Let's talk about the first stage. That first stage is what we call forming. Similar to that J-curve, it's where everyone is, it's like that first point, that first stage of the change. Nothing has really happened yet. The changes are just kind of being rolled out. This is an opportunity for groups that are newly formed to get to know each other. I think of it this way. In every county, as you're working towards this plan, there's going to be different and wide ranges of newness to the planning team. Maybe some agencies historically have a more developed relationship. You worked in partnership for a long time, so that seems natural. Maybe as we fold in and kind of expand, spanning our teams to fold in different community partners that you may not have historically worked with as much in the past. This forming stage is a way to get people on the same page, to share vision. It's great for people that are just coming together to figure out, all right, what's the purpose here? What are we doing? This is where strong guidance is needed the most, to clearly define the tasks for the group, to clearly define the role of the people at the table. So the goal in the forming stage is to set a clear and shared vision and to get to know each other, right? So I have a little activity that I've brought with me for you to do. This is a fun one I like to do for new groups. If you'd like to use it for your first comprehensive prevention planning meeting, please do. Let me know how it goes. Took it straight from the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. I'm going to ask you in the chat to choose a shape on the screen and tell me how it represents you at work. What shape represents you in the workplace, on a team if you want, and why? I'm going to give you an extra coffee sip for this one to think about. What shape are you and why in the chat? Time limit though. We have I'll give you 10, 15 seconds to think about this. There's no right answer, by the way. Squiggle, because I have many hats. A lot of squiggles, different projects I see. Great. Another squiggle. Lots of squiggles in the room. Squiggle. Great. I see circle. Wonderful. A circle as a strategic analyst. Love that. A lot of squiggles. A circle for inclusion. Triangle, 3 sides. Love it. Wonderful. I think of myself as a squiggle and a circle. Great. A circle in group dynamics, bringing people together. Awesome. Seen a lot of different responses. I've seen triangle because it's that upward feel that people are like, oh, that looks like an upwards arrow. I like to move the conversation forward. I've heard people say, I'm a box. I like structure. Purple triangles. I love it. Starting my morning sharp on a high, then tasks. Yep. Widens as I progress in my day. Circle. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, there is a slide that I've seen attached to this exercise that describes what each circle or square could mean. Is it scientific? 0%. Absolutely not. It is not scientific. Is it engaging? Yes, it is. It is engagement. The purpose of this exercise, especially in a large group, if we were all sitting around a table and you are a comprehensive prevention planning team, figuring out the who, what, when, where, how, you're going to create a dialogue and a conversation. I think in some cases, creating a non-threatening platform to talk about change and how we're feeling about it is great, because there's no wrong answer. So what if I was on a planning team or with my agency as we're planning to work with another agency, and I want to know how everybody's feeling about this change that we're about to go through, right? Like all of the things that I asked you, what kind of change do you expect? What if you asked them to pick a shape to explain how they're feeling about it? There's no right or wrong answer. What you're getting is insights. And as a leader, that insight is valuable to you to know on a rowing team, right, who might be having some difficulty because challenge may not be an easy process, and that's okay. So just this is an exercise to bring people together. It's forming the group dynamic, if you will. I have some other ideas, and thank you for those that participated. I appreciate that. I have some ideas for you here. What type of forming activities would help your cross-sector team? Any thoughts about that? If we're thinking about a shared common vision, we're thinking about getting to know each other, making sure everybody knows who's doing what and how they do it. Any thoughts on what type of activities or what type of to-do things you might need to form your cross-sector planning team? What about in the chat? Any thoughts about that? I have a few, but there's a lot of experience on this call, so I want to make sure we utilize that. What comes to mind for you? Creating a common purpose that benefits all parties? Yes, that would be helpful. Starting the conversation with where are we going, right? Where are we going? What is our goal here? What are we trying to do? A mission statement. Great. Maybe vision setting. Awesome. The idea here is setting goals. Love it. Yeah. In this forming stage, it is imperative that everybody know which direction they're moving in and how they might get there. Some things that you might consider: vision setting, formal introductions. How many times are you going to sit at a table with an agency, a representative, a partner that you've never met before? Probably that's going to happen. So what steps are you taking to ensure that everyone knows everybody at the table? And not only that, you know what you're bringing to the table and what everyone is, what services are being offered. I think this is a great place to get to know the planning team. Formal introductions, a directory. Some might do an assessment, maybe a formal assessment, whether that's to identify the players in the room, like a strengths finder assessment by chance, or maybe there are some vision setting tools that we could use, which there are. We'll be talking about that. Great. So after this forming stage, we've gotten to know each other. We know what to, who everyone at the table is. Remember at the JCurve, everything was great at that first milestone, and then what happened? We dipped into what we might consider uncomfortable, challenging. Well, that is the point of the storming, which is the next step. The storming is that deeper well. This is where we start to see some choppy waters, okay? Remember that the change impacts everyone differently. So in some cases, what you're experiencing in the midst of change is some resistance, because some members of the group may have more unclear questions. Maybe they aren't so clear on the vision. Maybe they have some challenges with the adaptation of to the new way of doing things. People on your team that are having some difficulty with it, if you're a leader in the house. Maybe accepting the changes. In those times, you can provide an opportunity for concerns to be shared, to provide that encouragement, that feedback, to allow the different responses to be transparently addressed to be clarified. Maybe what we're concerned about are perceived threats or perceived negative impacts, but not necessarily actual. These are just what we anticipate might happen. But maybe with a little clarification, there is some insight into to how to move out of it. So in this way, it would be important for people to have a place to problem, not just present problems, but this is a great place for problem resolution. I think about, an example that comes to mind for me, the FFPSA inbox. So we can actually share that. I'm going to share that later on today. I bookmark the FFPSA email inbox. If you have not heard of this, it's a place where you can submit your FFPSA Part 1 questions to the state. Like, hey, what am I doing here? You send them to the inbox and staff members are actively sorting through them, reaching back out individually to people, creating a guide of frequently asked questions. They are there to say, hey, what challenges are you experiencing? How can we be helpful? So I would ask you, oh, thank you. My team just dropped that into the chat. That is the inbox, by the way. This is a great place to ask yourself, where are you creating a gathering place for people to express their concerns, their challenges, and to work through them, to problem resolve them? Let me ask you a more specific question. I'm going to ask you to put in the chat. Now, you can't do it anonymously because it's the chat, but if you send it directly to a panelist, I won't say your name, I promise. So here's my question for you, is what challenges might you experience through the process of developing the comprehensive prevention plan as a county group? So we've kind of talked about it, right? And we've talked about the formation of this group. And now we're in choppier waters. What kind of challenges are we expecting here? What do you think? Anything in particular? You could be very general. That is okay. I imagine some challenges because we did talk about, I asked you, how do you feel about these changes? And there were some very valid, scary, right? Like scary, unsure. So I'm just asking, what are we unsure about? Aligning interests, getting together based on our other work. Yeah, different agendas. So lack of focus. So here's the thing. All of these things that you're saying, which I'm grateful for, and thank you for sharing them. Identifying what the challenges might be ahead of time or as they arise, give us an opportunity to meet the need. You cannot meet a need unless you know what the need is, right? So how then, so here are the questions. If there's a concern like, what if we're not clear on what the goal is? So there's a level of uncertainty. Or who's going to lead this meeting? Who leads the meeting? Who sends out the notes? Who does the updates? Who does this? Who does that? These are great questions. These are questions that can absolutely be raised and addressed in this storming phase. As the group is coming together, figuring out who is doing what, how is it happening, where do I go when I have questions? All the questions that you're wondering, your teams are also probably wondering, right? This is where the problem resolution kicks in. If we know that those are the questions, then what are the possible solutions? What are the possible solutions? Where might you go for an idea of where to go for the solution? You're like, I'm just trying to figure out who to ask because I have no idea. These are great, great, great questions. And this is what I want to remind you. And thank you so much. I see these coming through and some of them are sent directly to me. And absolutely bringing people together. How do we share information? How do we ensure that all voices are heard at the table? These are great. These are excellent things to be thinking of. And I'm telling you that if you're thinking of these before you get into these choppy waters, it's going to be a little smoother sailing for you. So what does it look like? I'm sure this list is a lot longer than I've written down. And you could probably add to it. And I would welcome you to in the chat. As we think about the challenges that might arise, it's equally important to think about what support systems are in place now, or what support systems are being needed to address those concerns. We dropped it into the chat that FFPSA Prevention Services Part 1 question inbox. It really is a helpful resource that if you are unsure, and there are some big questions that you have, you need someone to point you in the right direction. I couldn't recommend it enough. I understand there's technical assistance. There are so many different types of resources available. There are even some assessments that I'm going to be showing you today, like capacity building assessment. How are we just getting a shared language and a who, what, when, where, how? I can tell you that a strong plan in each one of these phases, starting with forming and making sure that everybody is sure of what to do, when to do it, who is doing what, will make the transition into the storming phase, which is inevitable, smoother. And you will be there for a shorter amount of time as you move out into the next phase. That next phase is norming. Norming is out. You've just made it out of that kind of choppy storm here. The norming is a place for people to find their rhythm, alignment, cohesion. This is where the purpose and the goals are well understood. Why are they understood? Because you talked about it in the forming stage. People were aware of what the goal was. As challenges presented themselves in regards to that goal in the storming phase, they were addressed and resources were utilized, which means you can now move into this norming phase, this cohesive collaboration. There might be individual and group recognition. People are forming better rapport here because you're getting to know each other, providing meaningful learning and development opportunities. I wonder what that can look like for agencies working together. What could that look like? I have a few ideas, and I'd be happy to see more ideas in the chat. And I saw here a pre-gaming for foreseeable challenges. Absolutely. That is that huddle before the play, right? You kind of talk through, okay, what are we going to do here? So these norming activities might look a little something like this. In your prevention planning team, it might look like subcommittees, maybe, I don't know. Maybe they are regularly scheduled meeting with intentional agendas. So we have, maybe it's sent out in advance. So if there's anything that was left out, I saw someone talking about stronger voices, and I want to make sure that, everyone's ideas are considered. Great. Sending an agenda out in advance is a great way to make sure that happens. Because if your particular area, you didn't have a spot for an update, maybe the concern that you have wasn't addressed, great time to send that feedback back to the agenda maker. So these norming activities just ensure that teams are able to work in the most collaborative way, working with cross-sector partners across the county. We would see this in a team, in a group that has found their way into the norming activities. A shared communication platform. Have you considered this? Do you have an agreed upon, which would probably happen in the norming, or I'm sorry, in the forming and the storming phase? What are we using for our meetings? County? We're doing Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Docs. Everybody like Google Docs? What are we using? That shared vision is also talking about shared tools. So in the norming activity, everyone is aware and using the shared communication platform, the agreed upon processes. And of course, there's a positive and productive dialogue. The last stage of a team, or I should say a group formation cycle, is the performing. So we've made it through the forming stage, right? The preparation for what's to come. We've made it through the storming phase, which are where all of the questions that we didn't think about in the original conversation start to pop up. That can feel like doubt. That can feel like a challenge. That can feel like a resistance. But we're meeting those challenges. We're rising to those challenges with problem resolution, productive conversation. From there, making it through the storming phase, we found a way to find some cohesion. That was the norming phase. We're just finding a way to make it a pattern now. This last stage is the performing. This is where a team or a group finds themselves in high productivity. They're confident, not just in themselves, but in each other. There's effective, what we call effective group membership. So everybody is aware of what they're doing and they're able to do it with little or no direction or oversight. In this case, I'm sure that would be important that you are just not aware of your partners in the room, but you also know who is doing what and readily referring to each other. Encouraging decision-making and problem solving is key in this stage. At this point, what you have is a well-oiled machine of a group. Decisions can be brought to the table, challenges can be brought to the table, and they can efficiently, effectively be resolved. A lot of problem solving. I will say in this performing stage is where we start to see really the fruit, right? This is where you're starting to see the progress. You're seeing how this shift and these changes are making an actual real impact in your county. It's a very exciting stage to be in, and I'm excited for you to be in it. Something that a team may do together in this performing stage, and they can only really do it after they've been through the change cycle, is a SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis is a great way to say, all right, look at us. We've done it. Now what? Because remember, the J-curve can continue to repeat. It can be a continuous, like J, repeat into a new J, repeat into a new J, like a garland. This is where it's a great time to ask questions like, what has been going well? What's been going well in this partnership? What are the strengths of the group members of the agencies that are all coming to the table? How are we utilizing those strengths? What could be improved? We look at weaknesses, areas of opportunity, right? I guess weaknesses is different than opportunities. What could be improved? What is not working? This is where transparency is key. What did not work out quite like we thought? What may require a revisit, a new conversation? Identifying gaps in knowledge or resources, it would be vital in this stage. Thinking through the opportunities. What meaningful opportunities or resources are available now? What are your current goals, newer goals, if you will? Think about the threats. Think about things that if they are not addressed, may hinder you from reaching your next goal or the current goal. What is it? What do they look like? I love that, we have different resources that are being rolled out that allow us to kind of evaluate that, right? Evaluate that in a structured way. Okay. So I want to give you some practical action items here, and then ask for your thoughts. But first, we're going to do a little recap. We just talked about the J-curve and the four of the stages of the group development model. I told you that they overlap very well together. So in the chat, the number one, that current state, if we overlap that J-curve milestone with the group dynamic model, what group stage do you think you would be in number one? Would you be in the storming, performing, norming, or forming stage? Put it in the chat. What stage are we in as a group there? Pop quiz. The norm before the storm. Very close. It's the form before the storm. I know, it doesn't help that they all rhyme, right? Forming, absolutely. Thank you. That is the form before the storm, which kind of answers the second question. Number two, we see ourselves where? A, B, C, or D? Are we storming? Are we norming? Are we performing? What do you think? We are storming. Yes, we are. It's that roller coaster ride. Great. We're storming. We sure are. That's part of the process. Just like the J-curve, it's that period of disruption. It's that cross your arms the other way. All right. But with practice and time, we find ourselves in 3. And what was 3? We have a 50% chance of being right now. We've narrowed it down. Norming. There we go. We'll call it the norm after the storm. Yeah, absolutely. This is where we're finding that cohesion. Great. And of course, that leads us to 4, which is forming. So I'm sorry, performing. So you'll see now why I have presented both models, because they so well overlap. All right. I want to leave some time for questions, of course, but I also want to talk about the path forward. So what do you do with it? Now what? Before I gave you actual action items, many of you had not heard of the JCurve. Many of you had not heard of the group dynamic model, or if you have, you weren't sure how they might be used. I'm curious how and if you put it in the chat, what would you say is a takeaway from this conversation? Maybe you've had your own light bulb moment of how you might use this, of how this information will assist you in your comprehensive prevention planning efforts. I'd love to know, since you hadn't heard this before, or maybe in as detail, what takeaways do you have so far? Because I want to add to those. If you would type them into the chat, or questions, I'll take it too. I'll take a little coffee break while you think through. I can almost hear those keyboards now. Anything? Great. Great. Gives reassurance as to what to expect in the change process. Is that what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Yep. There's highs and lows to be expected, such as change, but the highs are worth it. How to start the process. Yeah. That forming, right? Making sure that we have a strong, solid vision, idea of what's expected. The good news is that roadmap to comprehensive prevention planning we talked about prepares you for that journey. We're going to talk about how to start the process. Yep. Mm-hmm. We need to be aware of everyone's process, that they change differently. Absolutely. Everybody, change is a personal experience, my friends. It is different for everyone, and that's good to know. How to prepare to support everyone through their unique process of change. Yep. Great. Mm-hmm. I love these models as well. I'm so happy that there's some people, we dip before we rise. Mm-hmm. Great. I'm going to have to look at the other model that you've brought in. Next time I'm going to have a third model probably to fold in. That's great. All right. Thank you. I promise we will, I have about 15 minutes left, and then I would be more than happy to field any questions if there are any. So what does that path forward look like? And how does the path forward overlap with the comprehensive prevention plan, the roadmap? I will say that the roadmap does a great job of preparing a team, a group, an organization, a county, as they are going to move through these phases, providing tools. And these tools are intended to start kind of in that forming phase, the introductions, if you will, before the bigger decisions are made. But it starts with vision casting. So I want to talk about that. I think this was the answer key. All right. Oh, no, actually I have something to say. Where are you right now? Think about where you are in this prevention planning process. You know, we talked about during the roadmap webinar, if you were there, we considered it like a road trip. You're either still trying to figure out the destination, or you are well on your way. You can see it in sight, right? Or maybe you're broken down on the side of the road somewhere. So I'm curious to know, where are you in regards to this? We'll call it the JCurve, the forming, storming, norming, performing. Where do you think you are right now with your planning team? It might be forming. It wouldn't surprise me. It probably should be forming. Great. I see forming. Great. Do we have any storming in between forming and storming? Woohoo. That's great, Amelia, because it's not too late. It's not too late to, if you're throughout the course of this conversation, if you're realizing, ooh, We probably could have formed for a little bit longer. There might be some more forming to be done. Great. That is great. You can absolutely, it's not too late. It's not like you're in norming and you forgot the forming piece. For storming. We're performing. Great. But looking back at forming to see if there's any changes we should be doing to include others to the group to get more representation. Awesome. And I'll tell you, that also meets the requirements that we just read about in that that all county letter, right? That we dropped into the chat, which will also be in your follow-up email. Okay, way to go, everybody. So let's talk about some action items here. Some concrete to-dos, depending on where you are and where you're going. If we were thinking about an action plan here and thinking about what is available to you. Now, I will also say that I'm sure, because it's not always a linear path, right? And we even kind of talked about here that you might be in one, but you might have to go back to another. Totally fine. The resources that I talk about are include, but are not limited to. There are many resources I'm sure available to you. What I'm going to talk about are included, but not limited to, and may apply in other areas as well. So good to know for that. The forming is really where we're talking about those introductions, the shared vision, establishing who the group members are and making sure that everyone knows each other. Now, in that all county letter, there's a recommendation, and that recommendation says that you could share the change and implementation in practice readiness brief that was created by the Capacity Center for States to orient others to basic concepts of readiness. When I saw that, I thought, oh, so I read it. And it's great. I'd also highly recommend it. We will definitely drop that into your email. As a matter of fact, it's in the chat right now. Thank you, Dana. Dana, always great with the link dropping. So Rachel, don't you worry. We will absolutely drop the ACL again. We can do that in the chat. It'll also be in your follow-up email. But in there, they talk about like, hey, maybe this brief is a good place to get started. Why don't we have partners read it? Let's talk about it. Great level setting. Think about reviewing vision for prevention. It's about getting the right partners to the table. These are all tools and assets that are available to you. Like I said, we'll make sure to, with all the resources we talk about, summarize and send out. Now, as you move out of that forming stage into that storming, which we know is going to come, what can we do? That capacity assessment kind of can be somewhere, it's in that for storming, I think someone called it. It can be in that middle. I just thought one draw. No, thankfully it's the one that already exists. It's that 22-23. So for the storming phase, that capacity assessment, which is currently available, is a great conversation. It's a checklist. Has anyone not seen the capacity assessment? When I say that, are you like, what's the capacity assessment? I'll be happy to show you. Oh, there it is. Great. In the chat, that is the capacity assessment tool. It's discussed in that all county letter, that ACL. There's a link. There's two versions. You could print out a hard copy. You can do it as it looks like a survey, but it's not. It's actually just a worksheet. Allows you to progress through different questions. And it also gives you guidance on who should be involved in that conversation. Hopefully, the people that should be involved are people that have gotten to know each other. They're the forming stage, right? Or you're using it in the forming stage. This is a great time to set some goal setting. How often are we going to meet? How? What platform are we going to use? Group bonding. This is where rapport building, especially for maybe resources, organizations, agencies that you may not have naturally partnered with as much. I think about on our first call for this series, Exploring Prevention Mindset, I shared an example of a probation department up north that found a great a reframing. They started to reimagine prevention and what it could look like to provide primary prevention support to families. Who would they partner with? What would that look like? How? They started thinking through that question. And that means that they're going to have to get to know some family resource centers in their area, right? that's what I mean when I say group bonding and goal setting. It's getting to know how partners can work together here. And thank you. There's a capacity building. The tool is used in the capacity building phase of the roadmap, and you can see that roadmap in that link. Again, it kind of follows a progress, which is nice. It mirrors the models we're talking about. Next, we move out of that storming phase into that norming phase. Okay, we've gotten through some of the tougher challenges that we knew were going to come. We might be able to think about a readiness assessment, which is on the way. It's coming soon. Maybe there are regular meetings with structured agendas, shared communication platforms. This is where we're finding our rhythm in the norming phase. This is what it would look like as far as an action plan. And in that last piece, that performing, maybe we're implementing, we're evaluating. We've started to look through, we've kind of made it through this cycle, and now we are a well-developed, cohesive, efficient team. I think of everyone on that rowing team, right? Like with their oars. And again, I want to remind you that these are limited to, they include, but they're not limited to. And it is very possible that you might be using different tools in different areas. They're not committed to just that section. I want to go over a few more maybe structured steps and resources as well. I've talked about primary prevention. It was the first part of this series. It's a huge piece of this conversation. Where might you go to learn more? We talk about resources and wanting to make sure that you know who to go to, where to go to. A lot of different resources available to you. The CDSS, of course. We talked about that inbox where you can submit your questions. We have Strategies TA. That's your technical assistance partner. We have CalTrin providing free professional development. We have the CSSP, thinking through protective factors. That's primary prevention. The Child's Trust Fund Alliance, providing, by the way, that exercise that I gave you about the shapes, that is a CTFA exercise. They provide free self-paced information about protective factors. Of course, there's the CDC as well. So what are some next steps or tools that you may be using? If these are not found readily in the chat, because like I said, there's a lot of resources, it'll be in your follow-up email. We have the capacity building assessment, which exists and is great and has a formal structure around it. It gives you some guidance on how to use it, when to use it, where to use it, who should use it, how to use it. All those questions and more are answered on that assessment. It's a great time to come together and look through it with your partners. The Collective Impact Community Engagement Toolkit. Now, more to come on that. On May 10th, I really want to say, yes, May 10th, there is a webinar about the Collective Impact Community Engagement Toolkit. Correct me if I'm wrong, team, but I believe it is the 10th. And that would be, I would highly encourage you, if you're looking for tools and resources, you don't want to miss it. The data playbook, that is our newest tool in the toolkit. We're so excited about the data playbook, how to look at data, what to look for, when to look, all the ins and outs, if you haven't seen it yet. And you may not have because it's new and it's incredible. So we'll make sure to drop that. The readiness assessment is coming soon. Now, if you look at your roadmap, the readiness assessment comes after the capacity building assessment. So I would highly encourage you to start with your capacity building assessment as you move into readiness, but also asking, who is your local prevention planning team? Who's the CAPC? Where are they? Have you met them? Do you know where they are? Do you know who's involved? These are questions to help you in that forming stage as well. And of course, you can contact the FFPSA Prevention Services Part 1 email inbox. That's with the state. They are fielding those questions. Yeah, I love that. Just out the data playbook in the chat now. And of course, the Center for State has provided some great implementation tools, but also some assessments to get you thinking about where you are in the change process, in the implementation process. They have great information about vision casting, so about setting a vision first. It's actually, I believe, one of the, similar to a resource that was recommended in the ACL. great resource. Those will also be included in your follow-up. Okay, thank you. You can see these links, boom, 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 drop it in the chat. Thank you very much, team. So here's my question for you. There's a lot of next steps and a lot of possibility for next steps. I'm curious for you, what do you think your next step is? We've talked about this. You've now been thinking through some things, but let's put some pen to paper here. What is your next step? What is that? And remember, small steps make progress. So what is your next small action item that you need to do? We're going to call it in the next 7 days. What do you think you could do in the next 7 days to start moving you closer and further down that roadmap of comprehensive prevention planning? I'm going to ask you to put that in the chat. Bonus points if you say not just what you think your next step is, but when are you going to do it? That's the thing, right? I'll tell you my favorite quote. My favorite quote is to never leave the scene of an inspiration without a next step. Because it's difficult when we're brainstorming to recreate that brainstorming moment again on a whim. So if you're finding yourself thinking through things like, I should really read that ACL letter, I should really send that question I've had for the past 2 weeks to the prevention inbox. I should really read that brief. I should really reach out to that partner. I should watch that first webinar because I missed it. It could be anything, but what is your first step? And when are you going to do it? Share these resources with our partners. Oh, bonus points. When would you have the opportunity to do that? Are you going to email it? Do you have a meeting where you could carve out a few minutes? Can you put it on the calendar? This is where we start taking these theoretical I shoulds, right, into I wills. Read the ACL letter and watch the prior webinar. Great. I would challenge you, that letter, I don't know, give yourself 20 minutes, 30 minutes. There's a lot of good links in there, so maybe more than that. I would challenge you to put that in your calendar. Pick the day, because you know that it's difficult to find a time in your busy day. And they say that some day only exists in the month of Neverary. So we want to make sure that you're scheduling that. Watch the prior webinar. Great. It's a 90-minute webinar. Where are you going to find the 90 minutes on your calendar? I'd encourage you to book it. Bringing this change process, the JCurve and the group development steps to our TIC work group tomorrow. Wonderful. To identify where we're at and use it as concrete tools to help us move forward. Great one. Thank you for including when you'll do it. If you need any resources for that, would you please tell me? I mean, the email goes out in 3 days, but if I can get you anything in advance, I sure will. Thank you. Any other next steps, final thoughts before we can conclude here? Questions? I did not see any questions coming in the Q&A. If you have some, certainly feel free to ask. I will tell you, by the way, if you have questions specific to your plan, so sometimes people ask questions about funding or how to do this, how to do that. I may not be able to answer those, but I can direct you to the right place. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Thank you so much. Awesome. I see, share this information and these resources with my supervisor. Wonderful. Great. Maybe present them to the supervisory team on Thursday. Great. This webinar is recorded. So if there's any particular areas that you'd want them to watch, you can always send them and tell them, I always will tell people I would watch minutes here to here. My boss and I will be meeting with our deputy director this week. Great. So that sounds like it's on the calendar to discuss bringing on a consultant agency to assist and support with the development of the CPP. Awesome. That sounds concrete. Way to go. Great. I'm very grateful. I am thankful for your willingness to make an action step, because it does take time and strategy. But of course, the sooner you put it on a calendar, the more concrete it becomes. And it doesn't, you know what I like to say, it gets off of your to-do list and it gets on your to-done list. And then you check that one off. Wonderful. Great. Someone has a question about bringing on a consultant. That is a great question. I have many answers for that. I would say, I am not going to speak outside of my wheelhouse, I promise. This is what I would say. I would say that, to my understanding, there are many counties at different levels of their plan. Some of them have consultants, maybe already established. Some of them are still figuring that out. I will tell you, if you're looking for like a best practice, maybe a recommendation like, hey, what other counties in my area, or is my county already? Those types of questions, I would so highly encourage you to reach out to that FFPSA inbox, because the state is really, think of them as air traffic controller, right? They're sitting in the middle. They are seeing all the planes and what is happening. So I would absolutely reach out to that. And thank you for submitting that question. What other questions do you have for me? The next thing I have for you is a reminder of some upcoming webinars, but I'll give you a moment to submit maybe any questions that you might have. I don't want to miss anything. I'm a trainer by trade, so we're going to end on time, maybe a little bit early. No? Okay, I'll continue, and if I see anything come through, I will address. So some upcoming webinars that you may want to look at. We have the Collective Impact Community Engagement Toolkit. Remember, if we think about that roadmap, that graphic, I'll actually pull it up on my screen again to show you. Maybe I'll do that now. That graphic talks about using tools like an engagement toolkit. These webinars will sometimes focus in on a specific part of that roadmap. I cannot recommend them enough. The Cultivating Commitment, that will be the third webinar in this particular series. This is where we're going to review an actual framework. So this is an assessment that you can use with your team, maybe with your agency, maybe as a county, to figure out where are we in the commitment cycle. In order for a team to commit to a change, they have to be clear on where they're going, be clear on what their role is in that change, and also be willing to do it. They have to be willing to do it. And I want to tell you that, yes, I understand resistance is challenging as a leader, but we all have a role in this change process. And for some, it may be a more difficult change than others. But thankfully, I feel like this assessment will help identify what part of that change is the most difficult. Maybe they're not clear on the vision. Maybe they're not clear how they fit in that vision. Or maybe this isn't in alignment with what they are looking to do. I don't know. That assessment is very helpful. All right. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you, Dana. The objectives are dropped right into the chat. Wonderful. And then, of course, we have the roadmap for comprehensive prevention planning. That roadmap that we dropped, that really nice graphic. There were some incredible speakers from the state that were sharing what that roadmap looked like, what it was for, timeline, great information. If you missed that webinar, I would really say that's where you should have started and go back and watch it. After that roadmap conversation, we had a Q&A session. It was a panel Q&A where we asked different questions about funding, policy, tools and resources that different state representatives were able to answer for us. That was a great Q&A that is also available where you'll find all the reimagining trainings. This follow-up clinic, however, goes a little bit deeper. And I feel like we may have a link. I'm so sorry, I don't think I include that for our team. We have a link that lays out exactly what it is. This is implementation time. This is the how. We talked about the what, the why, the when. This is the how for that comprehensive prevention plan. All right. With that, I don't see any new. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate that. With that, I just want to remind you of some next steps. We have a survey in the chat, my friends. I can't tell you how valuable these surveys are because they often ask very specific questions like what is helpful, what more do you need? How can we be helpful to you? It is a two-way dialogue, and I would just ask you to please take the 2 minutes, maybe. There is a certificate at the end, and if you haven't received a CalTrin certificate, let me tell you, or I'm sorry, wait, there may not be a certificate. I take that back. But we will have a survey, and the webinar materials and all resources will be sent to you in the next 3 days. There is a certificate. They're really nicely designed, I will say, collector's edition. And I would highly encourage that you register for some of those upcoming events that we discussed. With that, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your good work that you're doing and your willingness to go through the change process. So grateful. Any questions, anything we can do? I'll hang out for a little bit. You're welcome to send any questions through on the chat. I'll stop the recording now.